Point with Michael Williams.
Decades of sexual harassment allegations against Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein come to light. It's another case of sexual harassment in the workplace. How often does it occur, and what can employees and companies do to stop it? Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Tori Dunnan, in for Michael Williams today. Since this story broke last week, it has really become a topic of conversation in many workplaces. So joining me now to discuss it are two employment attorneys, Robin Hankins, who represents both companies and employees, and Sid Garcia, who often represents employees. So first, thank you guys both for coming in. Tell us about what you've heard in the news and your general thoughts.
It's not surprising to me because I see clients every day, or not every day, but certainly monthly, that come in with the same type of issue. And it's a problem that I think has improved over the years as companies become more aware of their responsibilities under the law, but it still persists, especially with companies that have one man at the top and he is dictating to others below without any controls or balance.
I would agree with Sid. We had a large uptick of sexual harassment cases in the 90s. And there has been definitely a lulling of that and an increase that I have seen as well in my practice. And I have a lot of people who come in and talk about harassment cases with me, and a lot of companies that talk about how do we fix this? How do we address this? The one thing that I have seen is the companies seem to be a lot more sensitive and willing to take the appropriate steps to try to keep it from happening in the workplace, developing policies. But, like we've seen in Mr. Weinstein's situation, a lot of the victims feel like they can't come forward and they can't talk about it.
In this particular case, it comes down to sexual advances, according to these allegations, by a boss in return for career advancement or promises of the spotlight. Is that something that's pretty prevalent these days?
I think it depends really on the industry. Some industries seem to be that happens more often than in other industries. But I think, as Robin said, there's a lot of fear for victims to resist or to come forward, because if you resist, then you've got the problem with the boss who is promising something in return and then withholding something if you do resist. If you go higher than the boss, sometimes it backfires. There's many retaliation cases I see where women do come forward in good faith, make a complaint, and they end up being on the short end of the stick.
How prevalent do you see the trade for career advancement?
Unfortunately, in some industries, I think it's very, very common, and some it's not as common, depending upon whether it's more of a traditionally male-dominated industry, how well women have infiltrated into the industry itself. Different places have different types of situations, and different companies handle the complaints differently. I think Sid hit the nail right on the head when he said that when you have somebody who is the boss, who is maybe the CEO or the founder of the company, who is the subject of the allegations, not only is that more difficult for a woman to complain about him, it's also more likely that the choice that the company is going to make could be the CEO or the president or the person who has more power over the female who's complaining or objecting or refusing to be part of the situation.
You both mentioned certain industries where this happens more often. What do you see? Which industries?
Well, in my case, I represent a lot of government employees. So I've seen it in police departments. I've seen it certainly where there is a male, as Robin indicated, a male-dominated culture. It seems to happen more often there. Fire service, but it cuts across industries. The problem is that sometimes the HR departments, the human resources departments, are themselves intimidated depending upon how important the harasser is to the company. They don't feel they can do justice in the case, and sometimes they're afraid to do justice in the case because it may affect their own employment.
What do you tell the employee in these cases?
Well, I tell the employee to put any complaint that you're going to make in writing and provide specific examples. It doesn't have to be a legal brief or anything like that, but just give the employer enough information so that there's no mistake in what you're complaining about. Because many times Unscrupulous employers will mischaracterize what the complaint is about. And they say, well, she complained about a personality conflict and he was too mean to her or something like that, when the complaint really is rooted more in an attempt to sexually dominate or intimidate a woman.
What do you tell companies, since you represent employers as well?
It's very similar to what Sid has indicated, but it's the reverse. So that is, you've got to have very effective policies that are communicated, that are applicable to everyone, not just the lower level members, but also management, staff, even the board of directors. And you have to empower your human resources department to investigate and remedy these situations, because a lot of times if there's a culture of fear, or there's a culture of you cannot complain, or there may be an issue for you, then women will not come forward. And what happens with sexual harassment by its very nature is it evolves over time. So it may start very innocently and very small, and if not nipped in the bud, it can progress to be something that is career threatening for women. So the companies need to be able to empower the human resources people to look at these complaints objectively and to take action and to fix problems as they arise. Oftentimes that entails not only having a human resources person who's in-house, but hiring outside either counsel or an investigative service that's not going to feel fear or intimidated by allegations against, say, the CEO or the president, and they have some more reporting power. Instead of reporting to that person, report to the entire board.
So you mentioned reporting to HR. There's a fear sometimes among employees, if you report to HR, it will then get reported to the boss. Is that something that you hear as a real fear?
That comes up a lot. Employees sometimes are surprised that the harasser knows about their complaint, but really, in fairness to companies, there is really no way to investigate a complaint without talking to the harasser. You can't investigate these claims in a vacuum. What companies should do is tell the harasser there will be no retaliation, it will not be tolerated. And sometimes what companies do is they suspend one or the other individual or take them out of the environment so there can be no opportunity for retaliation. That doesn't always work to the benefit of the employee, because they feel they're being penalized by being transferred from a job they like to something that may be less desirable. But sometimes that's the only option to ensure that there isn't more direct retaliation from a supervisor, for example.
How often do these cases actually go to court, or are they settled more often than not?
Well, most civil cases are settled. So I would say that statistically, right around the same percentage of other cases. I mean, I've tried a couple of sexual harassment cases. I try to not maintain a practice where I'm always in court. I know Sid tries a lot more cases than I do routinely currently, and I do a lot more of the counseling and trying to evaluate these cases as they come in, make sure that they're being addressed properly. But I would say it's consistent overall. Maybe 95% of cases settle, and 5% or so, if that, go to trial and get a jury verdict.
When you bring up these allegations of sexual harassment, oftentimes people think of, the TV show Mad Men, the 1960s, but has it really changed all that much? I know you spoke in the beginning a little bit about decades and what you've seen, but with this in the news, does that change the outlook that things have changed?
I think it's definitely changed because that type of blatant, open public type of commentary is no longer the case, because employers are sophisticated enough to have learned that it's against the law. And you can't have supervisors going around trying to date every employee that they supervise. So I think it's definitely changed for the better with the enforcement laws.
I would tend to agree. I think that the types of harassment that we see have become more sophisticated, but women in the workplace are becoming more common, are becoming better equipped to deal with these types of issues. Unlike in the 80s and 90s when maybe a woman didn't feel like there was any power structure in place for her, we've evolved a lot, and there have been a lot of changes in the workplaces. The legal profession, when I first started, just by way of example, I would often be the only female attorney in the boardroom or in a deposition, whereas now it is very common, and it's a wonderful development in my industry in particular to see more and more women of power and the growth in the industry. And I think that happens across the board in a lot of organizations, where the more women that you have in the infrastructure and in the higher hierarchy, so to speak, of the company, you're going to have women feel like they can complain and that they do have some power and some voice, that they can raise these types of issues and not be victimized.
So you both mentioned women. How often is it that it's a male who comes forward with these allegations?
I actually have currently a case where a male employee is claiming that he was harassed by the co-owner of the company. Again, we're talking about a smaller company with no HR department, no harassment policy, no employee handbook, no one to go to. And he alleges that the co-owner was aware of the harassment. He complained about it. People saw it out in the open. We're talking about physical touching, groping, that type of thing. So it isn't entirely out of the realm of possibility, but I see it much less frequently.
I see it much less frequently in my practice that a male would be complaining. Where I do see a huge growth is male-on-male sexual harassment and same-sex sexual harassment. That was only relatively recently made illegal under the law. So there has been some increase in that after it's called the Uncali case. That case established that same-sex sexual harassment is as actionable as male-on-female or female-on-male. But because sexual harassment really is more a power issue, it's a power struggle, especially when you're talking about the types of issues like with Mr. Weinstein, you don't often see a female who is higher in the hierarchy of the company being the one who is doing the harassment. It's not unheard of, but it is much less common currently.
And we've spoken a bit of the code of silence. What about the people who know something's happening? They're not the person involved, but they don't speak up. Are they held accountable as well?
Not under the law, because typically only the employer can be sued under Title VII, or, for example, the Florida Civil Rights Act. It has to be an entity that employs 15 or more people. So typically co-employees, although there's a possibility for claims against individuals who do the harassing. But in terms of other employees not coming forward, that does happen, unfortunately, again, out of fear. But employees who do come forward, either in an investigation or in a deposition or a trial under subpoena, are protected by the law.
And then what do you see as the next stage in this issue? Does it stop, or does this just continue with time?
Well, I think as long as we have men and women in the workplace, we're going to have these types of issues. The more effective we are at dealing with them through time and saying, no, as the American public, as bosses, as subordinates, saying we're not going to allow these types of behaviors in the workplace, the more we're proactive and we conduct training and we look at the issues and understand there's still issues. I mean, I don't think that anybody can say we've definitely put to bed all of these types of issues. They're still out there. But the more that we address them and the more people think that they can complain and they will be heard if they're complained, I think we'll have fewer and fewer.
Thank you both for coming in. Definitely an important topic to discuss, so we appreciate it a lot. Coming up, our roundtable looks at what could be a major issue in the next election.